Okay, the first concept that we have here is the term adaptation. Okay, when you say adaptation, this is any characteristic that increases fitness. Okay, any characteristic that increases the fitness of an organism to its environment. This is defined as the ability to survive and to reproduce. Okay, so again, when you say adaptation, this is any change that an organism may have. It might be structural, it might be in the body parts, it might even be behavioral. Okay, it might be in the behavior of your organism, and this, of course, is done so that they can survive in their environment. Okay, so again, that is the term adaptation. Any change in your organism that can help it survive in its environment, any change that can help it become more fit to its environment. Okay, we also have the second concept here, which is evolution. Evolution here is the changes in species like the one just described in dogs over long periods of time. Okay, so basically when you say adaptation, this is a change in your organism so that it can fit in its environment, so that it can survive in its environment. Now, all of these adaptations over a long period of time, the process is called evolution. Okay, that is called evolution. Now, the third concept that we have here is the process that we call natural selection. Okay, this is a theory from Charles Darwin. We are going to be talking about him today. And this states that when you say natural selection, it is nature. It is the environment that selects whoever among these organisms are going to survive in its environment. Okay, who will survive, who will die. When your nature, when your environment selects the survival of your organisms, then you call it evolution by natural selection. Okay, hence this also has given rise to the term survival of the fittest. Whoever is the fittest for that environment, that would be the organism that will survive. Okay, so these are some of the concepts that we are going to be talking about today. Your objectives: describe the concepts of natural selection and evolution, of course, the process of natural selection. Your focus question: what are some changes caused by systemic evolution? Okay, so this is going to be our focus today. Now we start with the first person that we have here. This is Aristotle. He was a very famous Greek philosopher. Okay, now he was the first to attempt the study of evolution. He believed that species were fixed creations arranged by their complexity. So we all know that Aristotle's work was actually not very scientific. Okay, because his idea was very simple. He said, if an organism existed first, that means it is simpler than those organisms that would exist after it. Okay, that was the notion, that was the idea of Aristotle. Very simple. If this organism, if this species existed first, then that means it is simpler. Okay, if this organism existed after certain other types of organisms, and that means this organism here is more complex. Okay, so we all know that that is not actually the case. It is not true, but this idea lasted actually approximately for 2,000 years, okay? Until another person by the name of Carolus Linnaeus. Some books would use the names Carl von Linné. Okay, they're the same people. Carolus Linnaeus or Carl von Linné. He was the first to group similar organisms and assign them Latin names. Okay, so he is actually called the father of taxonomy. When you say taxonomy, that's the scientific grouping of organisms. Okay, so unlike Aristotle, his ways, his methods of arranging organisms, his methods of grouping organisms were already scientific. Okay, his methods of grouping organisms were scientific. He also came up with two-word names for organisms. Okay, we call this process binomial nomenclature. That means whenever you see a scientific name, say for humans, okay, our scientific name is Homo sapiens. Your scientific names should always be composed of two names. Okay, the first word here is the genus name, and the second word is the species name. Okay, say another example, you have Zea mays. Zea mays is a scientific name for corn. Zea is the genus name and maize is the species name. Okay, say you have Oryza sativa. That's the scientific name of rice. Okay, Oryza is the genus name and sativa is the species name. Okay, so again, these were all products of the studies of Carolus Linnaeus, the father of taxonomy, Carl von Linné, the first to scientifically group organisms. Okay, so that's Carl von Linné. Now, another very important person that we need to study today is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Okay, his studies started in 1809, and he was one of the first scientists to understand that change occurs over time. Okay, that means he laid the foundations of the study of evolution. Okay, now he stated that changes or adaptations changes are adaptations to environment that are acquired in an organism's lifetime. This is actually one of the mistakes of his studies. Okay, one of the mistakes of Lamarck was that he said, during his lifetime, an organism can have changes in his body, and he'd call this adaptations. He also said that acquired changes were passed to offspring. Okay, so he said, whatever acquired characteristics you have, whatever adaptations you have, this can be passed to your kids, this can be passed to your offspring. Okay, that was the study of Jean-Baptiste Lamarck in 1809. Now, he is also very famous for his law, which is called the law of use and disuse. Okay, what does this law state? The law of use and disuse here states that if you use a certain part of your body more, okay, if you use it often, the more you use it, the better it becomes or the stronger it becomes. Okay, that was the law of Lamarck, which is the law of use and disuse. But if you don't use a certain part of your body, then it becomes weaker. Okay, so the more use you give to that certain part of your body, the stronger it gets. If you don't use it, then it becomes weaker. Okay, so this here was actually the product of the study of Lamarck. People believed that a long time ago, our ancestors had tails. Okay, humans a long time ago, people said all humans a long time ago had tails. But since these humans were not using the tails, they did not use tails, now we no longer have tails, we only have our coccyx. Okay, your coccyx here, this is your tailbone. So now we only have the remnant of a tail. We don't have the long tails that other animals have. We only have this tailbone because according to the law of use and disuse of Lamarck, if you don't use a certain part of your body, then it's going to become weaker and it's going to become smaller. Okay, so that's Lamarck's law of use and disuse. Now, some other products of his law was, of course, the concept of the long necks of giraffes. Okay, so people believed, according to Lamarck, the first generations of giraffes did not really have long necks. Okay, they were short-necked. They only had short necks. But since they kept stretching their necks to reach the leaves higher up on the tree, eventually their necks became longer. Okay, and this, of course, is an example of their adaptation. This, of course, enabled them to eat, to get their source of food, which were the trees or the leaves and the branches of trees. And eventually, the giraffes that we have now, the giraffes that you see in your zoo, for example, if you go to the Riverbank Zoo, okay, if you go to zoos right now, the giraffes would already have long necks. Okay, so this is according to Lamarck's law of use and disuse. Another example for this would be the tails or the feet in snakes. Okay, so people believed that a long time ago, snakes actually had feet. But since they were not using these feet, eventually, the snakes that we have now, modern day snakes, do not have feet anymore. Okay, so that's the law of use and disuse according to Lamarck. Any questions so far? Any questions so far, people? Okay, so we've talked about Aristotle. He tried to group organisms. He tried to explain evolution, but it was not really a scientific explanation. Then you had Carolus Linnaeus. He started his theory of taxonomy. He started scientifically grouping organisms using binomial nomenclature, okay, two-word names. Then, of course, you have Lamarck here with his law of use and disuse, okay? The more you use a certain body part, the more it becomes stronger. The less use you give to that certain body part, then it's going to become weaker and smaller, Okay, that's the law of use and disuse. Now, as I've mentioned, Lamarck had several mistakes in his theories. Okay, so he did not actually know how traits were inherited because the concept of genes during his time was not known. Okay, they did not even know what genes are yet during that time. And of course, we know that genes are not changed by activities in life. We cannot change our genes through our activities. Okay, changes in genes or through mutation can occur or should occur before an organism even is born. Okay, so mutation actually happens even before an organism is born. Okay, so that were some mistakes in the study of Lamarck. Okay, now another person here, he was actually an economist, Thomas Malthus. He gave us a notion of population growth. Okay, one of his observations was that babies are being born faster than people were dying. All right, so again, the next person that we have here is Thomas Malthus, and he said natality, birth rate, is faster or is greater than morbidity or death rate. Okay, so according to Malthus, babies are being born faster than people were dying. But then again, the size of our population is limited by the resources that we have, say the food supply. Okay, so according to Malthus, people dying is actually a good thing. Okay, that's according to Malthus, because when people die, that means it increases or it balances our population size and the food supply. Okay, because of course, our resources cannot sustain the number of people that we have. Eventually, other people will die. Okay, again, your population size is dictated, it is directly influenced by the resources that you have. Okay, so again, he states here, if the human population continued to grow unchecked, sooner or later, there would be insufficient living space and food for everyone. Okay, it becomes very populated, and soon enough, not all of us will be able to eat. Okay, we will not have enough water supply. We are not going to have enough space for our houses. We are not going to have enough food supply. And so for him, people dying is a good thing. Okay, it balances population size and food supply. Now, Malthus here is very important because his idea is actually part of the ideas of Charles Darwin. Okay, so Charles Darwin here, he is known as the father of evolution. Okay, so he is our superstar today. He studied organisms in Galapagos Island. Okay, for those of you who speak Spanish, what's the meaning of Galapagos? You don't know? Okay, the name Galapagos Island here, Galapagos in Spanish actually means tortoise. Okay, and that was one of the animals. Tortoises are one of the animals that he studied in this island. Okay, so the term Galapagos Island, the name of the island came from tortoises. Okay, now when you say Galapagos Island here, this is actually part of Ecuador. Okay, it's part of South America. It's a group of 16 islands, and all of these islands here had varying climates. And because of their differences in climates, you all know what climate is, right? What's climate? Anyone who can tell us what climate is? The weather, that's correct. But when you say weather, it's daily, okay? It's day-to-day changes in your environment, day-to-day changes in your atmosphere. But when you say climates here, this is a long-term condition of your environment, okay? So it can include temperature, it can include the amount of rain, it can include humidity, the wind, in a certain group of land. Okay, so Charles Darwin here stated that Galapagos Island, it's made of 16 islands, but all of these islands have different types of climates. And because of this, the organisms on those islands also had unique characteristics. Okay, so Charles Darwin can actually tell whether a certain tortoise has come from Pinta, or a certain tortoise has come from Puerto Villamil, or it came from Española. Okay, all he had to do was to look at the shell of the tortoise. Because of course, remember, the environment can directly affect the characteristics of an organism. Okay, so since all these islands here, your Galapagos Islands here, 16 islands here, they all had varying climates, the types of organisms that they all have also had very unique characteristics. Okay, now in his study, Charles Darwin was actually on a ship which was called HMS Beagle. Okay, this was a ship that sailed from England on December 27th, 1831, and returned on October 2nd, 1836. Now, they were in Galapagos Islands on September 15th, 1835. It's already towards the end of their journey. Okay, so Charles Darwin was just a naturalist, he was a scientist, and he was invited by the captain of the ship. The captain's name was Robert Fitzroy. Okay, so he was making his observations on board the HMS Beagle. That was the name of the ship where Charles Darwin was. Okay, now again, we said Charles Darwin can tell whether this tortoise here came from Pinta Island, whether this one here came from Puerto Villamil, whether this one here came from Española, just by looking at their shells. Because remember, he said natural selection, nature, environment can predict, can dictate, can influence the characteristics of an organism. Okay, so for him, because of the unique characteristics of a certain island, the characteristics of the organisms would also be very unique. Okay, now another thing that gave him the aha moment, gave him a lot of his discoveries, were the finches. Okay, the finches were also very important in his studies. Okay, so he actually looked at the different types of finches in those different types in those different islands, and he took note that all of them had very unique characteristics. Say this here is a large ground finch. Okay, its beak looks like this. Its beak looks like this because its diet is seeds. Okay, now on the other hand, this cactus finch here, it also has a differently shaped beak because its diet, its source of food is also different. Okay, so again, this tells us that nature, the environment, could dictate, could predict, could influence the type of characteristics that we have. Okay, so Darwin then concluded that one type of finch maybe came from South America. It had arrived on the islands, and like tortoises, they had adapted to the different opportunities found on each island. So in his book, okay, so Darwin had this book he called On the Origin of Species. This was the same book where he wrote that humans came from apes. Okay, so in his book On the Origin of Species, he advanced his radical notion that evolution is not a single event. So according to Darwin, evolution is not a single event. It is not a one-time, big-time event. Okay, it is a process of change, one form from another into many different ones that happens over a period of time. Okay, so evolution does not happen overnight. Okay, that was the idea of Darwin. Your finches, your tortoises had to adapt. They have to undergo certain changes so that they can survive in their environment. And all of these adaptations happened over a long period of time, and you call this process evolution. Okay, so that was a process of evolution according to the father of evolution, Charles Darwin. Okay, so again, these are some of Darwin's conclusion. Production of more individuals that can be supported by the environment leads to a struggle for existence among individuals. This is very similar to the idea of Malthus. Okay, remember Malthus, he said, birth rate is higher than death rate. Okay, there's more babies that are born than there are people dying. And so because of this, we need to struggle. We need to compete with each other. And so only a fraction of offspring, only a fraction of these kids would survive each generation. And you'd call this survival of the fittest. Whoever is more fit, okay, in that type of environment, that will be the person that will survive, which is actually very natural. Right? If you say you move to another country and that country has a different custom, that country has a different way of life, you need to adapt, right? You need to change so that you can survive. Okay, so that's survival of the fittest according to Darwin. Yes, go ahead. Now, individuals who inherit characteristics most fit for the environment are those that are likely to leave more offspring, that are likely to have more kids than those that are less fit individuals. Okay, any questions with regard to Darwin? Any questions? Okay, this is our last slide today. Darwin's natural evolution had 5 points. Okay, first point, he states a population has variations. We all know this to be true. Even if you have twins, you are not exactly the same. There is no two individuals that are exactly the same. Even if you're twins, even if you're fraternal twins, even if you're identical twins, you are not going to be exactly the same. There will be some variations. There will be certain things that are different. Okay. Now, some of these variations may be favorable. Some of these variations may be favorable. That means some of these variations here may allow you to survive in your environment. More offspring are produced than survive. We know this to be true. This is according to Darwin's theory. This also according to Malthus's theory. Okay, so more offspring are produced than survive. There are more kids that are produced. There are more people that are born, but not all of these are going to survive. Okay, it all depends on their fitness to that environment. Those that survive have favorable traits, which we call adaptation, and the population will change over time. Okay, we call this, of course, the process of evolution.